Welcome to Human Monsters and part 6 of the Chad and Lori Daybell murders. On September 23rd, the day after JJ was last seen alive, Chad and Lori exchanged numerous messages beginning at 3:59 a.m. At 9:25 a.m., Chad called Alex's cell phone. Between 9:27 a.m. and 9:57 a.m., three cell phone towers located close to the Daybell house detected activity on these devices. One near Lori's home registered activity on her phone. Alex's phone traversed a path from his home to Chad's property between 9:55 a.m. and 10:12 a.m. It was tracked close to the location where JJ's remains were found. Between 9:30 a.m. and 10:27 a.m., multiple calls and texts were made between Chad's and Lori's phones. Between 10:13 a.m. and 10:17 a.m., Chad texted Lori and called Alex. No further questions. Prior cross-examined. Balance said the reason he included October 9th in his report was that it was the day Tammy Daybell reported the attempted murder in her driveway. Alex's phone records revealed it was at his apartment between 5:16 p.m. and 11:53 p.m. at the time the shooting occurred. No further questions. Wood had a redirect. Balance said he finds using 100 meters as a margin of error to be most precise. He said it was common for people who undertake criminal activity to disengage from geolocation services on their phones. No further questions. The court broke for lunch. The next witness called was Hannah Parker, also known as Hannah Munoz. Tammy was her mother's cousin. Roxy Wixom began questioning her. Hannah said she was confused and saddened when she heard about Tammy's death. At the funeral, she viewed Tammy's body twice. She and her father had a conversation with Chad that day. She said Chad told them Tammy had been sick on the day of her death, vomiting and coughing, and around 10 p.m. she vomited again. Chad said Tammy went to bed at that time, but Chad stayed up in his office working. Around 1 a.m., he went upstairs and discovered Tammy on the floor. She had rolled out of bed. He said she was cold when he found her. She found him to be calmer than she would have expected. He only displayed emotion when her father did, and the tears stopped flowing when her father's did. 2 hours later, she overheard Chad tell her mother what had happened to Tammy. He said she had been having a violent coughing fit and it worried him. Between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., she visited him in his office and said she was going to bed. Chad said he was worried about her and retired to bed at the same time. He said she rolled out of bed at midnight. Hannah was confused because the stories she heard were inconsistent. She told her mother later that night, then told Tammy's sister, Samantha. No further questions. Prior cross-examined. She explained that she gave a statement to law enforcement in August 2020. Pryor requested of her that she repeat her testimony, and she did. Following this, he asked her if she knew Chad's property is a single-story home. She says she did not. No further questions. Wixom had a redirect. He asked her if she had any doubt about the account Chad gave her about the circumstances of Tammy's death. She had no doubts. No further questions. The next witness called was Patty Later. She is Tammy's first cousin. Ms. later is known to be emotional and said she and Tammy were very close in age, only 7 months apart. They were so close they were like sisters. When she found out Tammy passed away, it didn't make sense to her. She was so young, healthy, and vibrant. She recalled seeing Chad at the viewing, and he told her what had happened to Tammy. He said he was in his office when Tammy came in, told him she vomited, and announced she was retiring to bed. He went to their bedroom later, only to wake up in the early morning hours because she had fallen out of bed or rolled out, and it roused him from sleep. She recounted that Chad gave a speech at the funeral during which he said Tammy wasn't easy to live with because she was lazy and frequently depressed, a sharp contrast to the descriptions her closest friends and relatives gave about her. Patty was embarrassed for Tammy that he would actually say such things to the entire congregation. She was struck by how disrespectful it was. Following the funeral, many stories were told about Tammy. One was told by Emma, who said Tammy wanted more pets. Garth told a story wherein he said he used to keep his head on a swivel when she played video games so that he could tell her when Chad got home. Chad appeared to find these stories amusing, but it seemed that his laughter was disingenuous. No further questions. Pryor cross-examined. He asked her if she would be surprised to find out that during the final year of Tammy's life, her cell phone records indicated no communication between them. Patty disputed this. They messaged each other on Facebook and through text messages. Tammy would also call her from time to time. He asked her if she remembered the conversation she had with Chad at the viewing about Tammy going upstairs or downstairs in the house. Patty didn't recall. No further questions. The court broke for the day. May 1st, 2024. Retired Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Eric Christensen was the first witness to be called. Lindsay Blake began questioning. The doctor performed the autopsy on Tammy after she was exhumed in November 2019. Christensen explained that an autopsy begins with a detailed external examination. Photographs taken of the body are documents to create a record of its original condition. They look for damage to clothing and the body. Clothing is then removed and photographed separately. The body is photographed in the nude, and then it is cleaned. More photos are taken. Any fibers and hairs located on the body are collected. The body is to be opened up from there, and everything is subject to examination. Even the brain, internal organs, rectum, spine, neck, and other internal components are scrutinized. X-rays are often taken to detect signs of skeletal trauma. He said there are more than one way to determine the age of injuries. He said he can often tell if a bruise is new or old. The coloration doesn't always indicate the age until you see shades of yellow, green, or brown. It gets harder to ascertain the age of a bruise if it is red, blue, or purple. The cause of Tammy's death was ruled to be asphyxia. In other words, she was unable to draw in sufficient levels of oxygen. The manner of death was pronounced as homicide, guaranteeing that at least one other party played a role in the death. It doesn't indicate intent, although that isn't ruled out entirely. Asphyxia can result from anything that blocks the airway. Smothering that results in the blockage of the nose and mouth. It can also be caused by choking, drowning, or chemicals like carbon monoxide or cyanide. He could see no other external injury that could explain her death. All her organs were normal. There was bruising on her arms and one bruise on her chest. This led them to believe that suffocation might have transpired. Seizures are also known to result in sudden death, but none of their findings backed up this hypothesis. There was fluid in her lungs, which is commonly detected in drug deaths, but there were no indicators that her demise was brought about by drugs. Conclusion: a negative autopsy. A person with normal anatomical features had perished. If a seizure had been the cause, what they would have expected to find are bladder or bowel incontinence, bite marks on her tongue, or a diagnosis of epilepsy in her medical history. He said it is very unusual for a woman Tammy's age to suddenly start having seizures, as they typically begin in the late teens or early 20s. Her heart was found to be without injury or flaw. The only toxins they found in her system were fluoxetine and selenium, but the levels of both were non-toxic. Photos from the autopsy were admitted into evidence, and Christensen described them all. The pink foam or pulmonary edema can be rooted in many things. He said if he had attended to the scene when she was found dead, he would have immediately performed an autopsy, since Tammy was so young. As for the bruises on the front, on the back, one on her left arm, and a bruise above her left breast, there were no bruises on the lower part of her body or on her head. More images were displayed. Christensen described them. The bruise on the left side of Tammy's chest, a close-up of this bruise displayed a hemorrhage in the tissue. More close-up images of the bruises were displayed. Taking all the bruise-related evidence into account, the bruises would have been dealt either minutes or hours before her death. These are the type that result from restraint. He noted that lividity, rigor mortis, and cooling are post-mortem processes. There were indicators of lividity, or the pooling of the blood closest to the floor after death. Tammy's lividity was on her back. Rigor mortis typically sets in about 12 hours after death, but variations can occur, and precise estimates can be elusive. Tammy was described as stiff and cold, both indicating that rigor mortis had set in. She had likely been dead for a minimum of 1 to 2 hours. It could have been longer, but not less than 60 minutes. With his training and experience as a background, the cause of death was declared to be asphyxia. No further questions. Prior cross-examined. The pink foam, or pulmonary edema, was not the cause of death, but it was present because of the cause of death. Christensen agreed with Pryor's assertion that the nature of the bruises was non-specific. He could only offer opinions on how they were inflicted. There were bruise ointments at the Daybell property, but he didn't discuss the bruising with the family. He determined that someone put a stop to her breathing. Pryor insisted on knowing how a person could suffocate her while holding her down and bruising her arms. Christensen said it could very well happen that way, and was unyielding in his opinion that Tammy was asphyxiated. There are 5 options for manner of death: natural, accident, homicide, suicide, or undetermined. The undetermined option is one they turn to when there is insufficient circumstantial evidence to rule on one of the others. Christensen said he didn't have a way to determine or test if fluoxetine might have interacted with any herbal medications Tammy was taking. The heavy lungs he documented could have had an impact on the cause of death, but this option was examined before asphyxia was decided upon as the cause of death. Christensen said he can't pronounce with 100% certainty that she didn't have a seizure. He just said it was very unlikely. From what he could tell from examining her heart, it was highly unlikely she suffered from the effects of arrhythmia. No further questions. The next witness called to the stand was Alice Gilbert, a neighbor of Chad Daybell. Lindsay Blake began the questioning. Alice knew the Daybells because of her interactions with denizens of the neighborhood and with members of her church. She became more acquainted with Tammy than with Chad. Alice and Tammy became close friends through the church. They would get together once a week and on Sundays from 2018 on till she passed away. She described Tammy as great to work with. She was organized and highly adept with computers. The church's staff was grateful to have her assistance. She remembered Tammy and Chad appearing to be a normal couple, that is, until 2019. Relations between them appeared distant all of a sudden. Tammy didn't slow down or change her level of activity before she died. She never once complained about her health or displayed any signs of suffering from health issues. She did recall that their marriage was strained due to financial problems. Emma told her that Tammy passed away. Chad assumed control of the phone call afterwards. Alice was shocked. She had just spoke to Tammy on Wednesday, and she was in good health and possessed of good spirits, as she was excited about the birth of her first grandchild. Alice went over to the Daybell house the morning Tammy died. All the children except Mark were present. They too were stunned. Chad informed her Tammy vomited at midnight, and they thought she passed away at 2 a.m. He said he believed she died from an embolism. He wasn't as emotional as the children. Tammy intended to attend the clogging class scheduled for Wednesday. Alice was not aware that Tammy had a cough. It caught her off guard when she and Chad got up to leave. Chad said there would be a funeral on Tuesday in Springville and a memorial on Wednesday. She was taken aback at the speed with which he was pushing these events through. She had enough experience with such events that she knew it takes longer to organize them, and he was not allowing for all contingencies. She presumed that everything had already been planned ahead of time, but Chad said this was not applicable. Alice said she attended the funeral because she had a need to see Tammy one last time and in her casket. She noted that there was nothing mournful about Chad's disposition during the funeral. She remembered the children spoke first, followed by Chad. She recalled that Chad's speech was very businesslike. Following the memorial, the church provided food for the family. Chad told them he was moving to Rexburg because he didn't feel comfortable in the house. It was only a few days since Tammy's demise, and yet he was already fixing to move out of the house. He told the children to go through Tammy's belongings and take the items they wanted. This also struck Alice as happening too soon. It's like Chad was a scavenger, eager to pick Tammy's remains apart as soon as possible, to rid the earth of her as soon and completely as possible. The following week, Alice saw Emma, and she came across as ill. She was morose and had lost weight. Some meals were prepared and dispensed to Emma and Garth because they were both struggling. They reached out to Chad and offered to visit him in Rexburg, but he postponed the get-together and told them he would visit them instead. During the visit, he told them he met a woman and was about to marry her. They were dumbfounded. The ink on Tammy's death certificate had just run to aridity. and he was already about to throw his lot in with another woman? It was shocking to consider that Tammy may have meant nothing to him, and this was the best possible evidence. They asked him where he met this woman. Considering that Lori Daybell looks like a tough cookie, the kind of woman who gets into fights with women who smoke cigarettes and dive bars, but they would behold her specter at a later time. They asked him how he met her, and he said they met in 2018 at a conference in St. George. Emma was familiar with Lori Vallow's name because of the podcast she recorded with Melanie Gibb. Chad told them Lori would be in town the following Tuesday, and they got together with them at the temple. Chad took Lori to their house later that week. Emma described it as awkward. Chad was more affectionate with Lori than he had been with Tammy, replete as it also was, with lots of laughter. They were like high school sweethearts. Lori told them her husband died of a heart attack in December, which was always one of the first things she told people about her life. Emma asked Lori if she had children. Chad said her daughter had passed away. Lori said she had other children, but didn't tell her how many, usually an important detail. Even those old farm women who had 20 kids and could barely remember all their names would at least mention how many they had. Chad said they intended to get married. They also made plans to take Chad's children to Disneyland. He also mentioned plans to go to Hawaii to write a book. He sure was busy for a guy whose life had just been turned upside down by becoming a widower. The court broke for lunch. Blake resumed the questioning of Alice Gilbert. Alice said she was not informed about how Lori's daughter met her end. She first found out Lori's children were missing in November. Chad spoke dismissively about it, telling her it was a custody dispute and that the dust would settle once it was resolved. The next time she saw Chad, he came by her home 2 weeks later to show her wedding photos, photographic proof that Chad and Lori were the happiest people in their lives. Alice was shocked that he married so soon. Subsequent to Lori's arrest, Chad asked if he could stay at Alice's house. She was okay with him spending the night, but was not comfortable with him becoming a roommate. When he showed up at her house, he was crying. He actually asked her and her husband to put their house up to pay for Lori's bond, but they refused. There was very little this guy wouldn't do to get what he wanted. Alice asked him how many daughters Lori had. He said she had one. She asked him about the daughter that died. He responded by saying he hadn't said anything about her dying. Once again, he drove home the point that she was absent from Lori's life because of a custody dispute. She asked him where the children were. He said Tylee was basically misanthropic and she particularly didn't like him. He made that latter point in the past tense. Chad told Alice and her husband that Tammy would perish before her 50th birthday. Tammy was fond of playing computer games, and he would tell her he had her grandmother come by to visit. By the way, her grandmother was deceased. According to Chad, her grandmother was unhappy about the fact that Tammy wasted time on the computer. That, after organizing and running Chad's publishing company, along with her own professional duties in the work she did for the church. But God forbid she do some gaming outside the margins of her busy schedule. No further questions. Pryor cross-examined. He asked her about her weekly meetings with Tammy. He said they got together on a weekly basis for about 2 hours, and on Sundays for another 2 hours. Alice mentioned an addition that was made to Chad's house, which was located upstairs. She wasn't aware of the living conditions inside the house. She remembered that when Chad discussed the missing children with her, she felt like he was being evasive, avoiding giving her a straight answer at all costs. Thou shalt not lie, Chad. No further questions. Blake had a redirect. Alice confirmed that Chad finally told her Lori's daughter was dead. She also found out that the remains of both Tylee and JJ were found on Chad's property. No further questions. The next witness called was Todd Gilbert, Alice's husband. Todd was aware of Chad and even read his books before they met. Alice and Todd moved into the Salem district in March 2017. They became neighbors and were formally introduced at church. He became more closely acquainted with Chad than with Tammy. He interacted with Chad about once a week. He said Chad would share his beliefs with him. Todd reacted with skepticism about some of Chad's positions. The storylines in Chad's books were inspired by his visions, and the rest was supplemented by fictional constructs. They frequently discussed events Chad predicted would emerge in the future. He told Todd Tammy's mission on Earth would conclude before her 50th birthday. On October 19th, Emma called Alice and Todd's home to inform them Tammy had passed away. They went to Chad's home that morning at around 8:15 a.m. All the children except Mark were there. He was on a mission as one of the church's elders. Chad wasn't nearly as distraught as Todd expected he would be. He came across as more businesslike, like he was a CEO, and lamented the fact that the company took losses in the fourth quarter. Chad told him he hadn't told the children he expected Tammy to pass away when she did. He gave him the story about how she got up around midnight, vomited, and he believed she died around 2 a.m. from an embolism. He had no idea how Chad could have known that. Chad then told him Tammy rolled out of bed around 5 a.m. Todd said this came as a surprise to him because Tammy was a very healthy woman. When the Gilberts first moved into the neighborhood, Tammy and Chad often held hands out in public. But in 2019, they became more distant from each other. The day after the funeral and the night of the memorial, Chad told him he had to move out of the house because he wasn't comfortable living there anymore. He informed him of his intention to stay with a friend in Rexburg. Todd found the timing of the funeral to be very rushed. It was almost as if Chad were impatient to get it over with, which Todd found strange. Chad looked upon the casket like it was some random object from the street he was anxious to get rid of. Chad had dinner with Alice and Todd a few days later, and he told them he had a girlfriend. He was initially reluctant to tell them who it was, but at some point he came clean and told them it was Lori Vallow. Todd was familiar with her name because of a podcast he had listened to, but they had never met. The first time he met Lori was at the temple with Chad. 3 days later, Lori and Chad visited Alice and Todd's home. Chad and Lori were sitting close to each other and holding hands. At one point, he was rubbing her leg, acting like a teenage boy who was falling in love for the first time. This just a week and a half after his wife died. Todd never saw Chad act that way with Tammy. Chad announced they were going to move to Hawaii. Lori gave her standard line about how her husband died of a heart attack in December 2018. She said she had several children and that one of her daughters had just passed away. After Lori and Chad married, they visited the Gilberts again. Chad was eager to show them their wedding photos. They said they took Chad's children to Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm around Thanksgiving. They didn't say anything about Lori's children going on the trip. Chad told Todd Tammy appeared to him as an apparition and that she was doing just fine. She conveyed to him her understanding that it was her time to embark on her journey through the spirit world. Chad's mission, on the other hand, was to achieve his own gratification by marrying Lori, and that his children were happy with the arrangement. When Lori was placed under arrest, Chad returned to Rexburg and paid a visit to the Gilberts. Chad claimed that Christ sent him on a mission to ask them to put up their home to get Lori released from jail and non consensual lesbian sex. Todd would not oblige, refusing to put his financial future in jeopardy for a woman he barely knew. Chad told him about how Tylee didn't like him. Todd was asked about the extension in Chad's home. He said there were stairs and back. No further questions. Pryor cross-examined. He asked Todd to describe the attached building in more detail. Todd said the entire family uses the space, and he was under the impression that there was a bed up there. Todd said he didn't know Melanie Gibb much. He had only heard her podcast. He met Lori in the presence of Chad at the temple a week after Tammy's funeral. No further questions. The court adjourned for a mid-morning recess. The next witness to take the stand was Janice Olson, a teacher employed at Central Elementary School. Roxy Wixom began questioning. Janice typically saw Tammy multiple times throughout a typical workday. They had lunch together 3 to 4 times a week. They had a flourishing personal and professional relationship. Tammy also attended the same high-fit Zumba class as Janice. Tammy never struggled to keep up, never fell behind, and never left early. Tammy was a model of health and fitness. When Janice was notified about Tammy's death, it was over the phone, and she couldn't have been more shocked, as so many others were. She had last seen her less than 24 hours before. Tammy never once told her she wasn't feeling well. She never had any complaints about her health. No further questions. Pryor cross-examined. He asked her about the Friday before Tammy passed away. Janice couldn't recall any specific details. No further questions. Wixom redirected. He asked her if Tammy had a proclivity to walk around the school's grounds. Janice said she did so all day, every day. No further questions. The next witness to be called was Taylor Ballard, who was an insurance broker from Ballard Insurance Group. Wixom began questioning. Ballard met Chad when he paid a visit to her office to ask about an individual health policy for himself and his children. He said he was losing cover from his wife's policy through her employer plan. He wanted to obtain cover for Seth, Leah, and Mark. Chad told Taylor that without his wife's income, the publishing company would operate at a loss. The health and welfare data indicated he turned a profit of $30,000 per year. She requested his tax returns on November 5th, 2019. Based on the information in his tax return, he operated at a profit, so he was eligible for a different insurance plan. Chad asked her were he to remarry, how difficult it would be to add his new wife to the policy. He said he would be remarried by the end of the year. At no point did he mention Tylee or JJ. In December, Ballard received 5 letters that were addressed to Chad but mailed to Ballard's location. She found this very odd since it was not something her other clients had done. That same month, Ballard was informed Chad married a woman with 2 missing children. Taylor wondered if they were the children she insured. She now had questions regarding the death of his ex-wife. She took a look at Tammy's life insurance amount and discovered it had been paid out. She increased it to the maximum amount a month before Tammy's death. On March 11th, Chad walked into Ballard's office and asked about insurance for his new wife, Lori Ryan Daybell. She told him the state covered her during the period of her incarceration. Chad told Ballard the FBI confiscated his computer, so he was unable to pay himself any income. He wanted to ensure he, his wife, and his son Mark had cover. He said nothing about Tylee and JJ. Ballard was concerned about the possibility that Daybell had a fraudulent life insurance payout. She was also worried that Tammy's death might not have been accidental and that the life insurance was paid out when it shouldn't have been. No further questions. Pryor cross-examined. Ballard said she was interviewed by Detective Mattingly and said she helped to reinsure the family since Chad and his entire family were losing their health insurance coverage due to the death of Tammy. Pryor asked about Tammy's insurance coverage. Ballard said it was 5 times her salary. No further questions. The court broke for the day. May 2nd, 2024. Kay Woodcock was called to the stand. Ron Wood began questioning her. Kay explained her connection to JJ, who was not her biological grandson. However, her son and his partner were unable to take care of him, so Kay and her husband took him in for the first 9 months of his life. Her brother, Charles Vallow, and his wife, Lori Vallow, adopted JJ because they were better equipped to take care of him. Kay and Larry were still keen on maintaining their roles as grandparents in his life, which was important to them. She remembered Charles and Lori as doting and loving parents in their approach to JJ. Lori came across to her as a wonderful person. Lori and Charles separated at the end of January 2019, and Kay flew to Arizona to help Charles take care of JJ. Charles was upset because Lori ghosted him. Kay took care of JJ in her Louisiana and Arizona homes until the end of March, when she helped Charles pack up his house and move to Houston, since that way he would be closer to Louisiana. In mid-April, Lori visited Houston. Charles was eager to reconcile, but Lori wasn't interested. Kay provided assistance to Charles with things like payroll and his business accounts. She had access to his emails. In June 2019, Charles rented a house for Lori in Chandler and then applied for a divorce. On the day Charles was murdered, he had plans to meet a friend to view a house that was closely located to Lori's in Chandler, but then he died from 2 gunshot wounds to his chest. She said Charles told her that he had $1 million life insurance policy, and he was making her the beneficiary. She committed to giving Charles's 2 older sons $250,000 each, and she did. The remaining funds were for her and Larry because she knew they would end up taking care of JJ if anything happened to Charles. She didn't know if he followed through with it before his death. Kay received the money months after Charles's death. At the end of July 2019, Lori reached out to her and asked if that was why she wanted JJ. She said, "I've got 5 kids and no money, and you get everything." The last time Kay spoke to JJ was on August 10th, 2019, when they had a FaceTime call. It was difficult getting in touch with Lori after Charles died. They only saw JJ on FaceTime twice because Lori set limits on the contacts. Kay tried to make arrangements to take JJ to his father's memorial service. She purchased a plane ticket for him, and all the details were taken care of, but once Lori found out about the insurance situation, She said she was too busy with moving to Hawaii and JJ would not be allowed to attend. It was only a day later when Kay found out about Charles's death. Lori sent texts to his two oldest sons to tell them their father was dead. It was from them that Kay heard the news. She thought it was a joke at first. She Googled his name and found out the murder had gotten some media coverage. After she found out Charles died, she knew JJ was in trouble because Lori didn't want him, Ty Lee or Charles. Kay got in touch with Detective Moffat of Chandler Police to convey her concerns about the situation. She discussed her concerns with law enforcement many times afterwards. Following Brandon Boudreaux's attempted murder, Kay and Brandon hired a private investigator, splitting the cost. On November 8, 2019, Kay struggled to hook a printer up to her computer. At 4:30 a.m., she woke and decided to try hooking up the printer again. This time she got it working. She saw Charles's Gmail account login page on the computer screen. She logged in and found an email from Amazon. It displayed a delivery address in Rexburg. When she logged into the Amazon account, she found that the last purchases made were malachite wedding rings. In addition, there were searches for beach wedding dresses, a yellow bathing suit, and men's linen beach clothes. These searches were made on October 2nd, 2019, 2 weeks before Tammy died. Kay and Larry went to Rexburg in early January 2020 and put up a reward for information that would result in the discovery of Ty Lee and JJ. They met up with the police department there. She found out the children's remains were dug up on June 9th, 2020. No further questions. Pryor cross-examined. Kay agreed that she had since found out that Lori took several trips to Hawaii during the 70 days she was missing after she left Charles and JJ. Charles had physical custody of JJ from February 1st to early April. She also discovered that Ty Lee made a few trips to Hawaii, but she didn't know where in Hawaii Ty Lee was or who she was staying with. Lori returned in April, and Charles returned his life insurance beneficiary to her. She wasn't sure about when he changed it to Kay. Pryor asked about the Amazon searches and whether Chad had access to Charles's Amazon account. Kay didn't know. Lori was the one conducting the searches, and she paid for the merchandise with Charles's credit card. No further questions. The next witness called was Angela Yancey. She worked in payroll and benefits for Sugar Salem School District. She explained to the court that she would do benefit meetings for the employees once a year. The benefits included medical, dental, vision, and life insurance. All employees had a $10,000 policy, plus there was the $50,000 group life insurance policy, and they always had the option to elect the policies. By the end of 2018, Tammy elected an $80,000 policy, which was the maximum amount it could increase. In addition, she elected a $20,000 spouse coverage for Chad. On October 21st, 2019, Chad went to the district office to find out how he could file the life insurance claim. He was informed he would need the death certificate before he could make the claim. He told her he ordered 8 of them, which she found unusual. She issued him a claim form and told him what he needed to do. Yancey thought it was peculiar that he came in so quickly after Tammy's death, as she had just died on Saturday, and there he was on Monday morning. Chad returned on October 25th to file the claim. Yancey was out of town until October 30th. He returned first thing in the morning of the 30th to file the claim. Chad was the primary beneficiary, and he received a payout of $130,000 on November 8th, 2019. No further questions. Prior cross-examined. Yancey was in agreement that the number of death certificates he ordered would pertain to the number of people who needed copies. She remembered the details as one would traumatic events. Wixom had a redirect. He asked her to clarify what traumatic events she referred to. She explained that the death of an employee is traumatic. And then there were the factors of Lori and the 3 children. No further questions. The court adjourned for a mid-morning recess. The next witness was Sheila Daybell, Chad's mother. Ingrid Beatty began questioning. She said she was married to Jack Daybell, and they are the parents not just to Chad, but to 4 other children. The last time she saw Tammy Daybell was on October 13th, 2019, and she seemed fine. She received a call from Chad on October 19th telling her Tammy had just died. Chad and the children were upset about it. It surprised her to hear that Chad moved out of the family home so soon after Tammy's death. She got together with Chad and Lori Vallow in mid-November at a restaurant. It was the first time she met Lori. They informed them they had gotten married. Lori told them her husband died of a heart attack. She also said her daughter died. Neither Lori nor Chad mentioned anything about their finances apart from saying the situation was stable. She found out they moved to Hawaii after that day. No further questions. Prior cross-examined. Sheila described Lori as friendly and upbeat. She came across as persuasive and confident. Chad isn't as gregarious as Lori. He married Tammy when he was quite young, and it was his first serious relationship. She remembered Tammy as a kind, giving person whose personality was similar to Chad's. After Tammy died, Sheila and her husband went to the Daybell home, and she witnessed as Chad struggled with the loss of Tammy. No further questions. Beatty redirected. She asked Sheila if it is common in the Mormon religion to marry only 2 weeks after your spouse has died. Sheila said no. No further questions. The next witness called was Heather Daybell. She is the wife of Chad's brother. Wixom began questioning. Heather and Matt, Chad's brother, had been married for 30 years. They began dating 35 years before the day she was questioned. She said the amount of contact they had with Chad and Tammy throughout the years would be considered normal. They were close and got together as frequently as possible until they moved away, and they would talk on occasion, usually about Chad's books. The relationship changed in 2014 when Chad began talking about the end of times. She was uncomfortable with his views on this subject. He told them there would be an earthquake in 2015, which would cause a great deal of destruction in the Salt Lake area. She said he foresaw these events in visions. He also told his family he was moving to Rexburg, bringing them closer to Heather and Matt. Chad told them they were destined to become great leaders, and their land would be hallowed, like a church or a temple. Once all this destruction would be done, the headquarters would have to move to Rexburg. Heather didn't see any credence in these teachings. She was concerned that he was telling everybody about them. She didn't believe these visions would come to a normal person. Visions like he was talking about normally only come to a prophet. She expressed these concerns. Chad just said, okay. They had moved out of the neighborhood with great purpose, and she couldn't have been more relieved. She didn't want him in her neighborhood or her ward. She also didn't want anyone to think she was associated with him. They asked if they could store their belongings in their shed in case they needed to access it in a hurry. They said they didn't think they would be coming anyway. Heather discovered shortly thereafter that Chad and Tammy put in an offer on a property in Rexburg. This upset Heather greatly. She even cried and begged her husband to dissuade Chad from doing it. It was too late. Their offer was accepted, and the process was in motion. She talked to Tammy and tried to assist them with the move. Tammy didn't take her up on it. Their relationship was strained. It appeared that Tammy believed in Chad's visions. The children also believed them. Chad approached Heather's son, telling him he too would become a great leader. Heather and Matt asked him not to approach their children. He said, okay. They invited Tammy and Chad over because they were concerned about Tammy. Chad asked them to direct any inquiries to him and not Tammy, but Heather refused because Tammy was a grown woman. She directed the questions at Tammy. She was concerned about Tammy because of the move. She knew Tammy didn't want to move at first. Tammy and Chad lived about half a mile from Heather and Matt's house. When they moved in, Heather visited once or twice. She told her about the local doctors and dentists and other such details. She supported them and the children as much as possible. He would see them once a week on Sunday. If she saw Tammy and the children, she would stop and speak to them. She avoided Chad because he still made her uncomfortable. On the morning of October 19th, she was in Las Vegas when she received a phone call informing her Tammy had died. Heather was very shocked and upset. She called Chad that morning and conveyed her condolences. She asked him what happened. He told her Tammy started coughing at 10 p.m. the previous night. She went to bed and woke up coughing around midnight and started vomiting. She went back to bed, and he woke the next morning around 6 a.m. after he heard a thud and discovered that Tammy had fallen off the bed. She had been dead for a while as she was solid to the touch. Heather said it sounded contrived, like it had been scripted. It made her feel uncomfortable. She asked if they planned to do an autopsy. He said no. A coroner found materials in her throat, which had caused her death, so there was no need for an autopsy. His words. He said the funeral would be in 2 days. She asked him if they could wait. He said, no, we'll get it done. They rushed back to attend the funeral. The program of eulogies at the funeral consisted only of Chad and the children. It was concluded by the bishop. Heather was the stake relief president of the church, and she had planned and assisted with many funerals. Chad was smiling and then crying. His demeanor was very odd. Following all this, there was a funeral luncheon. Chad arrived late. When he did finally get there, it appeared he was no longer upset. About 3 or 4 weeks later, she found out Chad remarried, but that his children were struggling and upset. She got in touch with them via a group text. Chad told her Tammy had been a problem for him his entire life. She asked him who he had just married, and he said Lori. He asked her if she would like to meet her. Heather declined the invitation. She asked what happened to Tammy. Chad told her she died of a pulmonary embolism because she gained 40 pounds. She saw Tammy every week but hadn't noticed any weight gain. Chad told her he would be living in Hawaii so she wouldn't need to worry about him anymore. She asked him how he could get married so soon after his wife's death. He said Lori's husband died of a heart attack and he had known her for over a year. They supported each other and had just gotten married. Heather said it seemed cruel to his children. Wixom asked what he meant when he said Tammy had been a problem for him his entire life. She said he didn't explain. The court broke for lunch. Wixom resumed questioning of Heather Daybell. She said her strained relationship with Chad continued to deteriorate after the remains of the children were found on his property. She hadn't spoken to the children since then. She said the trip Tammy took to Utah weeks before her death was unusual for her because she didn't like traveling alone. Heather was not familiar with Chad's visions of Tammy. Wixom added some photos into evidence that were taken inside of Chad's house. He asked Heather if she knew David Hope. She said he is her daughter's father-in-law. He's a retired police officer of the Rexburg Police Department. She had never spoken to him about the case. She sent a letter to all 10 Relief Society presidents in her LDS stake. The Relief Society is a group of women in every Mormon church that often provides support to various members. It was her charge to keep abreast of the presidents and give them support. She believed the letter was sent during the time JJ and Tylee were missing. The letter recommended sticking to the basic principles of the gospel. Chad was a relative of hers, and he had gone off track. She tried saying things to a few people, but they didn't believe her. Chad's interpretation was that she was just trying to make things hard for him. Some of the presidents got in touch with her because there were women in their congregations who abided by Chad's teachings. She tried to raise awareness about the fact that Chad involved himself in inappropriate activities. She shared the information she had with church leaders and spoke with others in an effort to stop what was happening. There were consequences to sending the letter. She and her family were affected because she, as so many believed, was going out of her way to cause problems for Chad. As a result, she no longer speaks with the rest of her family. No further questions. Prior cross-examined. She told Officer Mattingly she was concerned about Chad using the Salem church to do much of his writing for professional purposes. He continued his relationship with the Mormon church despite his unorthodox teachings. After 2014, the relationship between her husband and Chad soured because of Chad's beliefs. Then they moved to Rexburg and lived so close by that it worried her because she might be associated with Chad's teachings. When she approached him with concerns about Chad's teachings, his father referred to her as a, quote, pot stirrer. No further questions. Wixom had a redirect. He asked if someone having an adulterous relationship is conducive to the church. Having an affair is not conducive to his role. Had the church been aware of it, Chad would have faced discipline. He once took another author, Julie Rowe, to her home. They seemed to be very close, which made many in their circle uncomfortable. By the time she wrote the letter, she felt Chad had become a very misguided person who involved himself in relationships with people who hurt others. She told Chad's father on several occasions about her concerns about what Chad was involved in. On another occasion, his father told her not to be a pot stirrer. All she wanted was for his father to talk to him, and maybe he would have listened. The letter was sent out after the children's bodies were dug up in Chad's backyard. Join me next week for part 7 in the Chad and Lori Daybell murders. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.